Greetings, rabble rousers. My name is Jessa McLean. Welcome to Blueprints for Disruption, a weekly discussion dedicated to amplifying activism across Turtle Island. Together, we will examine tactics, explore motivations, and celebrate successes in disrupting the status quo. Greetings, audience. We're here for another special edition of Blueprints of Disruption. I've got producer Santiago Helou Quintero on again with me today because there is something we definitely need to talk about. And we wouldn't be worth our name, Blueprints of Disruption, if we didn't talk about the hopefully impending Ontario general strike. We're in quite a situation over here in Ontario, an exciting one if you've been dying for a general strike to bring down this government since they took office. But here we are. We're going to give you the basics of what's going on, obviously, to get you up to speed, especially for all our listeners outside of Ontario. But I mean, who's not paying attention to this right now on the left? Seriously. But we'll fill you in. We're also going to get into the core issues of what this means. It's not just CUPE's contract on the line. It's not just their right to strike, right? So we're going to take a deep dive into the current labor strife here in Ontario, but we're also going to talk about the idea of broadening this, right? Maximizing this moment. Santiago and I, we finally met in person. We met up at Queen's Park yesterday, which was Friday, the first day of this strike. And although it wasn't the largest rally I have been to at Queen's Park, I was excited to be there. I think there was a certain showing of solidarity there, and it had the feelings of the beginnings of something, and quite a lot of the union leaders that got up on the podium had me excited. So, before we kind of get into the exact details of where we're at, how was yesterday for you, Santiago?
I mean, for me, days like yesterday are essential when you do the kind of work that we do, because being reminded that these are issues that a large number of people do care about, that these are issues that people are willing to fight for, that people are willing to stand together in solidarity against oppressive tactics, that is incredibly important. And just honestly, when I got there, all I wanted to do is just stand there and just feel it, take it in.
Soak it up.
Yeah. Because, it's so easy to fall into a nihilism and a hopelessness when you do this kind of stuff. And I needed to force myself to really feel what that was. And like you said, it wasn't the biggest. Of course, also we went for the second shift. If I'm not mistaken, I think the first shift might have been a bit bigger. Not quite sure. I've been running around since yesterday. But, the other issue is that, this was something that was far beyond Queen's Park, right? There was a show of solidarity across the country outside of all kinds of offices. And also, for people who couldn't, because also a lot of people, Friday, you're working for a lot of people, and not everybody can take it off, of course. And whenever we are approaching these things, it's a good idea to also remember privilege when it's these things, because some people who are at the absolute edge are not able to sacrifice a day's paycheck or time, and their support is still as valid as that of anybody who can show up. And that is something, there's been all kinds of show supports on social media, messages being sent out, people talking to each other. This is very clearly something that is reaching an incredibly wide audience across Ontario and across Canada, right?
Yeah, that's why I wasn't disheartened by the size of the crowd, because of the pickets I drove by on my way there. In small towns north of the city. It was surprising to see the turnout and the energy of that turnout. So I just imagined those numbers replicated in so many towns in Ontario. And like you said, we opened a Twitter space yesterday, and there were people from right across the country that were deeply invested in this. We're talking about solidarity actions, and yeah, this certainly has captured folks' attention. So what are we talking about? Let's give folks the basics, right? And we always assume everyone knows where we're at, but we've got 55,000 CUPE education workers here in Ontario currently on strike. Now, folks would say it is an illegal strike, but only because the Premier used the Notwithstanding Act, a loophole in our charter that allows him to override our charter rights, their right to a collective bargaining agreement, their right to strike. All of those things were taken away from them in the aptly named Bill 28, Keeping Students in Class Act. We'll link that awful bill to the show notes. But I think we've seen on social media one of the most glaring lines in that act is, this act applies despite the Human Rights Code. So, that says a lot about a piece of legislation. So this is levied against 55,000 educational workers, folks who have been on the front line all during COVID. These are the people that make our schools run. We're talking about ECEs, caretakers, office staff, library staff, and the use of these workers varies across the school boards in Ontario. They can't run without them, right? So kids were out of school. There is a move to pivot online. We'll see how that turns out, because that's not done without these support staff. So that would have been just that, right? It would have been these folks out on strike illegally. But let's stop just for a second. That doesn't happen every day here in Ontario, a wildcat strike, right? We quite often call for strikes and the response is, well, we're not in a legal position to do that. CUPE really went out on a limb here, Santiago, and that was the first flame. That was the first light, right? We always see ugly negotiations between the province and workers. That was kind of normal, the going back and forth in the public. But they defied legislation by not going to work on Friday. That light a little bit of a spark in you?
I definitely really appreciate that, because that's what's needed, unequivocally. That's what needed right now. You look at what are the implications of what is happening right now, the implications of the use of the Notwithstanding Clause, the implications of how quick this action was done too, the implication that carries for not just labor. This is the bare minimum that needed to happen, I think. I think it was absolutely essential. And also, I was just thinking, as you were talking, really, this is a bit of an unusual tactic from Ford, because if you think about it, they could have let CUPE strike for like a week and then done this. And then, maybe I would guess that the public outcry, it would be bad, but it wouldn't be quite as bad. But they did it right at the start. They didn't even let them get a chance to have like a legal strike, right? Because to be clear, the Conservative government, the Liberal government as well, they've trampled on labor before, right? They've mandated back to work legislation in the past, and that hasn't gotten the response that this has gotten, right?
Yeah, this was next level. I think I've heard someone describe it as using the nuclear option right away. And that's why the response to this is so important, because if that's some sort of litmus test for how he can treat all the other public sector unions that are going to have to negotiate their contracts, including the teachers, if this were to just go by without much note, without much fight, surely this would be exactly what would happen to everybody else negotiating with the province. And not only that, you would have private sector folks looking at this type of negotiation, and they don't have the Notwithstanding Clause to protect them. But it sets a really ugly precedent. We have to keep in mind there's some really ugly premiers out there now that are also watching this to see if they can get away with using the Notwithstanding Clause. And just for folks that might not understand what it is, it was put in by Trudeau's father and the whole crew putting that document together. But you have to remember, it was really important to placate the premiers into signing whatever was put together. And jurisdiction is always a fun topic when trying to get a national document like that signed. So the Notwithstanding Clause was put in there so premiers could override the charter. So that is not just the right to strike. That is every single right that you find in the charter is as easily swept away with the Notwithstanding Clause as this has been. So, that's really why I think this has had a different reaction than just typical back to work legislation, because it has such far-reaching implications, right? When we looked at the United States, Roe versus Wade, and the precedent they were using to make that decision, folks understood it was also going to open the door for them to strike down other rights that had been won. And so, this is a tactic being used worldwide to slowly strip us of our rights. And this is just such a big issue. And clearly, OPSEU got the message, right? Because as soon as CUPE went on strike, I think hashtag general strike was trending. I stand with CUPE was trending. We saw endless statements of solidarity coming in, some, notable ones we could talk about, but nobody put action to words like OPSEU did with their own walkout yesterday. So we got to hear J.P. Hornick down at Queen's Park as well. That was a changing of the guard at OPSEU. For a long time, Smokey Thomas was their president, and a lot of folks were frustrated with that leadership, and a lot of work went in to change that over into something obviously far more progressive, militant even. And that was the moment for me where I started to get excited at the idea of more wildcat strikes. And I was proud of OPSEU for doing that. So other notable mentions of support, and I don't want to give them any credit, but it is worth discussing, because if we're talking about bringing everybody into this and recognizing the dangers of this, LIUNA, Google them. I don't have time to get into how bad they are, but just know they campaigned essentially for Ford in the last election. Pretty tight with developers. We'll just leave it there. They've even come out, and they were pretty early in sending out their cautionary statement against Ford's actions. That surprised me. Santiago, are you waiting for the police union to chime in or what?
No, not even remotely. That would be... No, I long stand by the belief that police unions are not actually unions, and I will stand by that forever.
That's okay. I'll hold your hand and stand there with you, buddy.
Yeah, class solidarity does not extend to police unions, and that's just where I'm at.
We did get the firefighters. They had a smoking statement that I saw come out this morning. I didn't even intend that. It's endless. We'll see how many resources go into those solidarity statements, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be some fines to pay and some strike pay funds to top up, especially if we expect more of the same here. So where are we at now? Today is Saturday, and it didn't just end yesterday, right? The OFL, together with CUPE, are holding what they're calling Solidarity Saturday. And they're shutting down Yonge and Dundas Square. I originally reported this to you, Santiago. You kind of rolled your eyes. Is that not cutting it for you?
Well, I mean, living in downtown Toronto as I do, I feel like Yonge and Dundas Square gets shut down on what feels like a weekly basis to me. Like, that's just the thing, right? Going to shut down Yonge and Dundas Square. It sends a message, but it doesn't. I mean, at the end of the day, it's also largely a pedestrian intersection. Largely, there's not a lot of cars that really go through Yonge and Dundas Square because it is such a chaotic part of the city, because it is one of the most pedestrian-heavy areas in the city. I think it's one of the only diagonal crosswalks that I can think of in Toronto, right? That's how
confuses a lot of people.
Yeah, that's how many pedestrians we're talking about. And for me, if we're gonna be shutting down roads, let's shut down roads. Let's go for the DVP. Let's go for the gardener. Let's actually send the message, because that's what's at stake here, right? This calls for action that is far more consequential, if you ask me.
More disruptive.
Exactly.
Certainly, like, we've got to bring the province to its knees. And a lot of folks understand that there's, political implications to that. You see it on social media. I'm sure you hear it from your neighbors and friends. When they're inconvenienced by a strike, they groan often. Quite often, they blame labor. They blame the unions. However, I think public sentiment has shifted a bit. We will still see the same kind of complaints, no matter how disruptive or little disruptive we are. But more people are coming around into just how bad this is. I mentioned the Twitter space that we had. There was a speaker on there. In their bio, they identified as liberal conservative. So I was cautionary when they came into the space, but they were fully on board. They understood the implications of this, did not like it, and wanted to do something about it. So I have seen, like you said earlier, 55,000 employees, especially in the educational sector. That touches a lot of people, right? I've seen a lot of people change their profile pics to I support CUPE, and they're the least political people I know.
Yeah. I mean, whenever you get a number like 55,000, right, you run into the degrees of separation theory at quite an extreme level, right? Because for those who don't know, like, the 6 degrees of separation theory is essentially that you are only 6 degrees of separation from anybody else in the world, right? Now, that's anybody in the world. When you bring it on a much closer level to somewhere like, Ontario, really, 4 degrees of separation would probably do it. Now, that's just between one person and any other person. When you bring that to 55,000 people, the degrees of separation for anybody in the province from one of these education workers, that's very little. 1 or 2. 1 or 2, guaranteed. For most people, 1 or 2 degrees of separation away. For myself, as an example, my partner, her mom is a secretary at a public school, right? Her entire family work in education. So I have very few degrees of separation from this. And I'm sure the case is the same for a lot of other people. So what we're running into is that, like, if this isn't affecting you directly, it's affecting somebody you know. Or it's affecting the people somebody cares about, So it's quite a large influence here.
And it's about to get bigger, right? 2,200 GO Transit workers have just voted, 81% of them, against Metrolinx's latest proposal, right? So starting Monday morning, GO Transit is pretty much going to be shut down around the city.
Yeah,
and
not just the city, right? Because it's the buses. So that's shutting down Mississauga, Peel. I forget the list, but for a lot of people who commute into the city, they won't be able to on GO buses at least, right? There is a very large implications to that.
100%. Like, that, the only way York Region is essentially connected to the city of Toronto, where all the jobs are, is through GO Transit one way or another. And yeah, they'll be on strike. Now, this isn't a solidarity strike. They are in negotiations with Metrolinx, obviously an awful employer, but connected through partnerships with the province. It's complicated, but these are the type of negotiating tactics people can expect, right? And so I think, like, that's why a lot of unions need to get on board with this, because they can just expect the same when they go to negotiate. This is starting to be the new standard, right? Santiago, earlier you said, like, there's really nothing to lose at this point. And I think workers and unions are starting to get that idea that, we've always understood the value of a strike. It's supposed to be disruptive. It's meant to demonstrate just what happens when you fuck with workers, how important we are when we withdraw our labor. You call us essential. Let's just see how essential people are. And it just kills me when folks, I sympathize, I understand that's an awful pay scale, but do they have to be so disruptive? Can't they do this after class if they really loved students? And that rhetoric is just so old to me. But I think, again, more people are coming around to understand the purpose of a strike. It's not supposed to be pretty.
Let's rephrase that for a second too. Like, let's rephrase that argument. You know, people say, why can't they do this? Why can't the government pay the workers their fair wages? Why can't they do right by workers? Right? Do not blame the people. It's victim blaming is what it is. And these arguments are gaslighting. To blame the people who are being taken advantage of, that's victim blaming. It's the government's fault for not paying enough. And we haven't really gone into details about, the treatment of education workers. So I'm just going to dig into that a little bit, right? We're talking about, I think they've received 2% raise over the last 10 years, 12 years, something like that. They've received next to nothing. And really, let's not talk about percent raises because it hasn't even come close to keeping up with inflation. So essentially, over the last 12 years, their wages have been going down and down and down. They're being paid less and less and less. This is the people who make education possible. And you know what? I need to talk a little bit because I wasn't a student that long ago. I mean, I am a student right now, but as a high school student, as an elementary school student, that wasn't that long ago for me, not really in the grand scheme of things. And I want to talk a little bit about my experience with education assistants and the people who make this possible, right? Because, people, when you say janitor, they think of, just cleaning the floors, right? But that doesn't come close to covering the extent, right? It's far beyond that. I mean, these are people who, first of all, they're people, and they're people who students have relationships with. They're people who they talk with the students, who they're a form of support as well. I have had tons of janitors throughout both elementary and high school who were just great support for me, who were part of the culture and the community of the education institutions. It goes far beyond what people think. Same thing with secretaries. Secretaries are the people who make everything possible. You think a school can run in any sort of way without secretaries? I mean, the work that they do keeps everything going. And they don't deserve to be paid a fair, decent, livable wage. Right? These people are the community. These people are part of, just as much of a part as teachers, as what it means for a school to work, and also what it means for students, because they are people who interact with the students, and they're people who make everything possible. And so they've been paid less and less and less. They deserve to be paid more, without a doubt. The offer made by the Ontario government isn't even inflation. I mean, that would be the minimum, but it's not even that.
The hashtag 39K is not enough. Like, that is referring to the average salary of those workers. Santiago just explained how essential they are. That's well under the Canadian average. And when I was looking at some of the numbers that CUPE was providing just to drive this home, 33% of those workers were sole income earners in their families. So that means they're living in poverty and they're taking care of our children. That's astounding to me. So just to give more details there, because you're right, we didn't quite spend enough time on that. The province, CUPE is asking for 11.7% raise. And this is to accommodate for years and years and years of what Santiago rightfully described as pay cuts, right? They have less spending power than they did 12 years ago. And their working conditions have deteriorated in those years. So their job is harder. And the province came back. Talk about bad faith actors from the very beginning. The province's first offer was 2% raise for those folks that are earning less than 40K and 1.5% for everybody else. So they weren't even close. That is not negotiating. And that's not coming anywhere near catching up with inflation or making up for the lack of pay. And Santiago said the money is there, even if, we can name all the things that we could defund, like the police, to make room for proper spending. But just in education alone, they just sent out $200 checks per child to every parent as a bribe, essentially. They knew this was coming and they buttered them up to get them on their side. But the point is, they also spent that money. That money could have been the raises for these workers, but they chose to send it out to parents. They treat us like consumers. And so for folks that are saying, you know, where would you find the money? That's where they could have found the money. And, you know, there's a million other places to do that. So this is just trampling on workers, not just their rights, but just like their dignity. When you understand what they needed and then what you offered, that is just a slap in the face. So it's no wonder CUPE is pissed off. And yeah.
I want to mention, because people, we hear this literally every single time, and it's such bullshit. Where do you find the money? What do you mean? What do you think magically happens to this money when you give it to education workers? What do you think? It just disappears? It vanishes in smoke? No, that's what happens when you give money to rich people. I mean, when you're talking about wages at this level, it's all going right back into the economy, right back in. It's being spent instantly because it's nothing. Like, we're not talking about people who are paid particularly well. This isn't going into savings or anything. This is bare essentials to survive kind of money. And that money is going right back into the economy, and it'll circle right back. Like, come on now. It's such gaslighting every single time that they say, like, where are you going to get the money? Where is the money going to come from? What do you mean? The money's there and it'll come right back. That's how an economy works. And they act like we're idiots to not understand that. I mean, come on now. Sorry,
No, man. And let's bust another myth while we're here. A lot of the lies coming out of, I can call them a liar without getting kicked out of anywhere, but the lies that are coming out of Lecce and Ford about sick days. So you might hear some feedback from folks saying they have 130 sick days. And they're saying that's because that's what the province is saying. But those are part of the short-term disability that's there to protect workers. That's something we fought for. Just because not everybody has those protections doesn't mean that's frivolous. And nobody is abusing those. It's not easy to go on short-term disability. It's not full pay. And it's a load of shit. And what it is Ford, again, trying to pit people against workers and getting people to punch down instead of up. What I mean by that, I say that a lot on Twitter when people come after, why does so-and-so get this and I don't? And they're not talking about corporate welfare. They're talking about someone else from the working class. And it's just like, you're looking at the wrong people, right? Don't look at these folks as asking for a lot of money. I don't care I do care, but what a janitor makes somewhere else or where a secretary makes somewhere else, right? Unions are there to bring all those wages up. So we can't hold them back in their fight because that'll just stall everybody else's, and if we allow them to come down in pay and to be valued less, we all will be. And so these are the only folks that are out there bargaining in great numbers that have that collective power that can help push back against that decline of wages that we're seeing. And that is the front line there. And they're the last people holding that line. So, I am really eager to see a general strike. And I want to talk about that, like what it looks like, how promising the prospects are here, and who it should involve. Because it's not just unions. I'm not in a union. Are you?
No.
Well, you're in the student union. Like, we won't talk.
I wouldn't classify that really as a union. I'd consider it an activities committee.
Well, let's just say not all student unions are created equal, all right? We don't want to discourage any folks out there that if you do want to turn your student union militant, by all means.
No, and the other thing is that, like, for example, because my program, we were going through an interesting situation last year where the college, Humber College, was not allowing us to record on campus without providing a 2 weeks notice, which was incredibly harmful for journalism students, right? And at one point we were even talking about, because we didn't have a lot of hope in our union, we're like, we don't need to go through our union. We'll make our own. Like, that's the other thing is, like, you don't have to rely on what exists. You can create your own structures and your own paths and do it your own way. It doesn't have to rely on people who are not going to do anything. That's the other thing.
Yeah, we'll get more into that. I do want to, the OFL, we had Patty Jarvis Coates was kind enough to join our Twitter space. And I kept trying to get her to come on the mic there. It was kind of last minute and I didn't want to put too much pressure on her, but she was really awesome. And, putting aside the fact that perhaps the tactics that they're using today, tomorrow, aren't where we're at, she was assuring folks that the OFL was putting a lot of resources into this, that they were in for a general strike. I don't know if she used those words exactly, but what she described that they were doing and what she was encouraging from folks certainly sounded like wanting a general strike. So that was really promising to hear. And I think there's other kind of signs that we might be going in the right direction, or at least that it's percolating a little bit more than we've seen in a long, long time. My favorite moment, Fred Hahn in the legislature, as he's getting kicked out, looks down at the floor and probably at the Minister of Labor, because the Premier's a coward and I don't think he was even there. And you don't know what you started. And to me, it was like, well, if anybody knows what's he just started, it would be Fred, right? Like, what did he start, Fred? Like, tell me, like, is that, is that what we've been waiting for? So that moment there kind of gave me a little bit of goosebumps. And I hope Fred knows the fire he's lit, by sending his workers out. Like, I hope he feels that warmth of that fire for a long, long time, because I'm incredibly proud of what they've done there. But that kind of gave me that feeling, Santiago, that, no doubt it's been brewing for a while. But how are you feeling? Like, are we headed there?
Yeah, I mean, you look at, I definitely think we're heading there because, for one, the implications of the use of the Notwithstanding Clause is something that reaches out to all labor, right? Now, let's talk about the size of labor, because it's far bigger than these 55,000 CUPE workers, because that is just one part of CUPE. CUPE across Canada is actually 715,000 members strong. 715,000. And that's just CUPE. Labor in Canada is 4 million workers strong.
Wow.
Do not mess with 4 million organized members of labor. Because that's who they're messing with, right? Because that's what the implications are here. The implications are that this could be used against any of them. So it's in all of their best interest. Talk about creating class solidarity, right? It's in everyone, all of their best interest to fight back against this.
I love your enthusiasm, so I hate to come in here and be that bit of a Debbie Downer, but we all know that not everybody in a union will understand these implications, right? Like, there has been a lot of good work in terms of politicizing union members, but they are just an exact sample size of the folks you have around you, right? So if you've got folks in your family, just because you're progressive, that doesn't mean they're progressive. Even if you talk at them all day long, that might not matter. So clearly, there's 4 million unionized workers. Will they all come out? If they're paid strike pay, right? Like, that is a big part of folks being on strike. It impacts them negatively as well, financially. So I was really encouraged when Lana Payne came to the mic yesterday at Queen's Park. Now, Lana is the new president of Unifor. Say what you will about, we should be spelling out all these acronyms, folks. I'll link some notes, link some information in the notes. But Unifor is a huge union as well. And it sounded like to me, Lana promised to pay the strike fines incurred in the Ontario strike. So that's one of the barriers we've got to make sure we address, both the strike pay, like if that means GoFunding, or these unions need to bolster each other's purses. But if workers are going to feel a negative impact and they don't understand the reason behind it, that will be a problem, right? That won't be as effective. So, but again, it's encouraging that there's, obviously they think of these things and they're trying to demonstrate that, make it easy for folks to come out. Like, look, we will take care of this. Your workers will not feel the pain, except for maybe on their feet from walking picket lines. So that's definitely needed, is more union leaders. Maybe if they can't get into a strike position safely, I don't know what their deal is, that they make sure that other folks are able to do it, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say also just that when we're looking at this, right, obviously 4 million people are not all going to have the same views at all, but it also, this is something that extends beyond workers who are currently unionized, right? This is something that it's a class issue, right? If you're a part of the working class, you have likely been taken advantage of at some point or not, especially in the last few years, right? When it comes to not being paid fair wages, how many people can relate to not being paid fair wages, right? How many people can relate to exactly the treatment that they're getting right now? And also, I mean, a lot of the messaging from the progressive conservative government has been aimed at parents, right? Trying to rile up parents. Parents are not necessarily monolithic either, right? Like, there are a lot of parents who, they don't want to see the people who help take care of their kids all day be paid starvation wages, right? So a lot of them are on the side of the workers here. There is a lot of solidarity going around, and I just want to mention that I'm very hopeful about that.
absolutely. And these workers are parents. They understand the impact, right? These educational workers many of them are also parents. So to try to pretend that it's workers versus parents just seems absurd to me. I don't think they've thought this through, right? I think someone described on the Twitter space as kicking a hornet's nest. Like, he just doesn't quite understand how many people would be upset by this. They seem to be relying on, historically, teacher strikes have not gone over that well. They are not received well. They are incredibly inconvenient because of the way we've structured our workforce. And it forces a lot of people to stay home and take sick days, or worse, they may not have those protections. So it's one of those strikes where folks really need to understand the importance of it. So, as much as folks can do to have those conversations with the people around them, bust those myths, and really start working on every single person around them, bring them over, that's critical. Like, unions, like we said, just can't do it all. It can't be up to them to politicize their members solely. That's just not how things work. Your boss or whatnot can't just tell you how to feel politically. A lot of that has to come from something a little bit more intimate.
Yeah. And when it comes to talking about, I also just want to mention, because, we're talking a lot about unions, right? When it comes to labor, it doesn't end at unions either. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because, like, at the end of the day, unions are, in my opinion, like the starting point, the bare minimum, right? But when it comes to the workplace under a capitalist society, the workplace universally operates under an authoritarian system, right? We do not have democratic workplaces. Unions are introducing a type of democracy, but, like, it's still a limited one, right? What really people need to be aware of is those power dynamics in the workplace, and the fact that, for the most part, businesses, workplaces, they do not have the best interests of the people who work there in mind. They're trying to maximize, especially when it comes, for corporations, they're trying to maximize the amount of money that goes towards shareholders. That means constantly looking for ways to minimize the amount of money that they have to pay to the people who are actually making the money for the companies. And that is a universal principle, right? So when it comes to talking about this issue and how widespread it is, this is a pattern that is applicable to literally anybody who is a part of the working class. And I just kind of wanted to go into that a little bit.
And I think I saw that as well on social media. I keep going back to the Twitter space. You guys really need to join them, because they lead to such great discussions. We have so many speakers, and I would say the majority of them were not unionized, but they all did something on Friday, whether they through their own action in their small town, like our comrade Jay Woodruff, who's been on the show a few times, and couldn't find one on the picket finder, so held his own action. CUPE, helped facilitate it to a degree, but really driven. And we had other folks there who are normally advocates for ODSP, but, we smell a fight. And people who have that working class consciousness, and obviously when we say working class, I know that term is problematic. It does not mean all people who work. It is everyone but capital. We can get a little more nuanced than that, but there's no middle class, upper class, lower class. We're all working class. Particularly if you're listening to this podcast, you are working class. And they understand, I think if we boil it down to how I had to explain it to my kid, it makes sense. And people are feeling it. They're feeling it. This is a bully that we're up against in the most, basic sense, right? Let's remove the politics a little bit. He's a real bully, and he is going to do whatever he can get away with. Bad stuff. And one union can't stand up. One sect of people fighting for ODSP on their own won't get that. And they recognize that, because especially folks that have been fighting for increases to the rates of OW, Ontario Works, which is essentially welfare for folks who don't know outside the province. And ODSP is Ontario Disability Payments. And those folks are in legislative poverty, and really no one takes up their cause unless they're on it. And you can only imagine what advocating for something like that without a union, without money, while you're struggling to eat looks like. And those folks understand the value of this fight right now, to take hold of this moment where we need to demonstrate our power as a collective, as a province. This is so important when you're in class warfare, right? Not only does it help people understand we are all one class with one cause, it shows our enemy, which is folks imposing austerity on us from above. It shows them that they have gone too far. And it puts them in danger, not physically, not their lives, but their political lives. And that's all that matters to them sometimes. So we absolutely need to demonstrate in massive numbers. And that momentum has to be held up until he bends. CUPE cannot lose this fight, because if CUPE loses this fight, we are going to see a whole lot of bad. One of the things we had in our notes here is privatization of our key services is on the line through this. Right, Santiago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's really what it all comes down to when it comes to this, right? It's a classic conservative tactic as old as time, which is constantly defund public services until they do not function and then privatize. And that is what they are trying to do here. There was an article in the Toronto Sun written by Brian Lilly, who is a conservative columnist who is already calling for school choice and vouchers, right? And that's how they do it. They start introducing a two-tiered system and then move towards full privatization. It's clear as day. This is not an issue of they're not paying the workers because they don't have the money. It's not a money issue, not even remotely a money issue. It's a defunding public services issue. And it's not even the only instance of it. I mean, we're seeing that in healthcare right now as well, right? That's been the other aspect of this. I mean, healthcare and education. What kind of villains, because, you're talking about bullies, what kind of villains go after healthcare and education? Like the most fundamental of rights in any civilized society. Healthcare and education.
Yeah, let's talk to the healthcare workers out there. We know the nurses have been treated like garbage right there. Pay raise was legislated at, 1.5%, that in denial of their collective bargaining rights. And our hospitals are in crisis. We talked about health coalitions on another episode with Peter Bergamanis, and he talked about the atmosphere in the health coalitions, how they were in this crisis mode. They understand that we are so close to losing public health care completely at this point. And, the neoliberal model of making public services so bad, so underfunded, so intolerable that even though you might not have the funds, you seek something elsewhere. You seek a charter school for your kids so they they're not disrupted by a strike, so that they're not in a crumbling school. You try to get ahead of the waiting line by scraping together whatever you have. So they know this, and they talked about the need for a general strike back then, and that it was actually labor that was hesitant to take it to that level. So I think what this does, what CUPE has allowed, is set this precedent, a new precedent, that they can jump on. It would be a perfect time for healthcare workers to take job action in any form to make this part of a general strike. Obviously, they have a position where they can't risk folks' lives. So I'm not sure what that looks like, and I'm not going to speak for them. But this is the time right now, right, to make sure that that is protected as well, because 100%, and it's not just healthcare, it's not just education. This man wants to strip all of our green spaces. And in fact, he's using this moment, Premier Ford, to do just that. Things he promised he wouldn't do. So like Santiago, like endless things are on the line here because he will just keep going and going.
Yeah. And when it comes to the green belt, I mean, it's a particular level of audacity, right? Because this is an issue. He had tried to do this in the past. The public outcry was such that he was forced to retract it, and when he was campaigning for his second term, he promised that he would not touch the green belt. Now he's going for it. Why is he going for it? Because his development buddies want the development contracts. That's the only reason. It's incredibly transparent what's going on here, and he's using this moment when people are focusing on what's happening with CUPE to hope that people are too distracted to notice that he's doing that, because these are incredibly unpopular issues, right? Incredibly unpopular. And one thing also I want to mention too, because when we're talking about privatization, right? And I know that anybody who's listening to this already knows the dangers of privatization, but I'm going to just like throw it out there anyways, because it's always good to like talk about the fact that like the United States uses vouchers and they have a 2-tiered education system. And there's been multiple studies. Stanford actually did a study and they found that vouchers do not improve academic achievement. Right. I don't think I have to tell anybody about what a failure the U.S. healthcare system is when people are constantly dying because of lack of access to healthcare. That's what they're trying to do. You look at the South, you see what a disaster that has been, and they look at that and say, that's what we want. And why? Because they're bought off to do exactly that. This is not a political thing in the sense of they're not doing this on an ideological basis. This is purely because of who stands to profit off of the privatization of our essential services.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think Ford is too stupid to understand that the entire neoliberal model, 100%, but it is ideological, right? Like this is what capitalism is. This is especially what neoliberals do in terms of stripping public funding to drive people to be completely dependent on the market alone, and there to be no social safety net. Well, just enough to keep workers alive. Some of them, just enough of them. But you talked about it being unpopular because, Mike Harris, the last time we had any kind of real job action to get really excited about, to be honest, was back at the Days of Action, Metro Days of Action. And that's in the time of Premier Mike Harris, who had incredible levels of austerity cuts that the province still feels today. Those are generational cuts, as will be the ones Ford have already implemented. And when Santiago says it's unpopular, some people might be wondering, and in particular, the Notwithstanding Clause. I took political science in school, and when we got to this topic of the Notwithstanding Clause, it was understood that it wasn't greatly used, even though it was there for the premiers, because it is what we call political suicide. I apologize for the term, but a political suicide in that you can use it, but you'll pay for it next time round, right? Vote them out. That's exactly what will happen if you use it, because, we all look to the charter. That is our Magna Carta. That is, we think it's so precious. We need a whole episode on how it's really not worth the paper it's written on, to be honest, when it comes to really securing rights. But that's not what the most Canadians perceive it as. And so when you trample on our charter rights, right, Freedom Convoy, I'm talking to you, where are you at protecting our charter? You can actually stay home. But they aren't supposed to use it because they want to get voted in again. Well, Ford's in a unique position. He's in his second so-called mandate, majority mandate, and he's got nothing to lose. He's not getting the job again, and he has got a lot of people he owes favors to, let's just say. He's got a lot of donors he's likely made promises to. And we've seen it especially in his persistence to strip the Greenbelt for developers. And I think what you're seeing here is just this firestorm of stuff that is likely to come down the pipe should he not be stopped in this moment, right? So if people wonder, why is he doing something that is going to be so unpopular that he'll be remembered for? It's like, because he doesn't give a shit, he'll get paid. He'll get paid. He'll get a job in the private sector once this is all over, and he'll be rolling in dollars, no problem, no sweat off his back, totally be able to pay for private education, private healthcare. It will not impact him in this way. He's got thick skin. He can deal with people being upset with him, calling him all kinds of names and blaming him for the downfall of Ontario. He's okay with that. He's clearly okay with that. And I think that's what makes it just so clear. Like, it's now or never, right? It's now or I guess the other teachers are next. And that's someone we've not talked about, Santiago. They were curiously absent from our discussion, and they are curiously absent from the picket lines. We're talking about the other teachers' unions. I would have thought we would have seen a little bit more than some well-worded statements and their leaders getting up on soapboxes. Teachers' union leaders have instructed workers to cross virtual picket lines. So starting Tuesday, the province plans to pivot to online learning. And that means teachers for OECTA, that's the Catholic Teachers Association, for ETFO, the Elementary Teachers Federation, and the OSSTF, which is your high school teachers. They're all going to be working Tuesday. As of now, right? As of the time of this recording. What do you think about that? I mean, I asked a lot of people. I'll share what I heard, but I want to hear from you. Should they be out there?
I mean, I absolutely think they should. First of all, education workers, the 55,000 education workers are not the only people who are being taken advantage of. There's been an incredible amount of cuts to education. Teachers have been protesting over the last few years as well. They have all the reason to be angry as well. I see no reason whatsoever why they wouldn't be standing in solidarity right now. Because also, I mean, Ford has very much made education a target. When you're talking about privatizing education, that's also taking away their jobs, or at least changing it. The classroom sizes, the amount of bullshit that goes on in education, from a provincial funding point of view, you would think that it would make all the sense in the world to be standing in solidarity. So I don't really have an answer for why not.
For me, I'm surprised I didn't bring this up earlier, because it really upsets me, not just from the obvious standpoint that, every union should be out there in solidarity, especially education workers, but these folks work side by side with the folks that are on the picket line. What is that going to do to the work environment afterwards? How is that building any kind of workplace solidarity? I know we're divided into different bargaining units for various reasons, but it's typically to our detriment. And I know that when the teachers were on strike, I've seen comments that CUPE workers were asked to go into work, and some did obviously cross the line. But this isn't a moment for a tit for tat. This is a time to capitalize on this moment as a working class struggle. And I do worry about the future for, the education sector, should they not. And I've seen a lot. I think teachers' unions might be unique. And, if I'm wrong, again, I'm not a teacher. I seem to have a lot of teacher friends, so it might be a bit of an echo chamber. But I've seen a lot of them openly calling on their union to join the picket line. So they're appealing to their provincial executive, asking them to take a different stand on this. And I've even seen some of them questioning whether they will go to work on Tuesday with or without orders from their union leaders. So, that is still yet to play out, because I think a teachers' union is unique in that they understand this struggle a little bit better, because they have been treated so poorly in negotiations for so long and have been actually pretty inadequate in their strikes. There's lots of reasons behind that, not trying to slight them, but they need a moment too, really badly, and they'll be next. So I hope this plays out a little bit different by the time this episode airs. Something has changed. That OPSU and CUPE have helped give courage to some of these unions, but I am shocked, especially the OSSTF. I know a lot of good people that worked on Karen Littlewood's campaign, and she had the promise of being progressive. I would have actually picked her opponent, to be honest. I'm not sure if that's where the problem lays, but I need those folks. We need those folks to come forward and do a little bit better. It's actually astonishing to me.
And I think this brings us a little bit full circle back to, general strike, right? And the need for a general strike, right? Like, this is the time for everybody to stand together and shut everything down and show exactly how important all of these positions are in society. Because, the schools, you need the schools, right? You need the schools to be working. Education is a pillar of society. You need hospitals to be open and be able to be taking patients. You need bus drivers to be taking people to and from their place of home to their place of work and back, right? You need all of these things for society to function. Pay them an adequate amount, not even adequate, pay them what they deserve to match with that, to show how important it is. And if not, shut everything down. Shut everything down. That's where I'm at, is that we need to shut everything down.
100%. I think it's important, we talked about unions, and I know you've tried to draw us back many times, so we'll do it again. Labor's important. What they do now is very important. I'm not going to minimize that. The OFL has definitely got to take leadership on this. I think they are. But we don't need labor to lead. We don't need them to initiate everything. This isn't the type of movement or moment where you need to defer to any kind of leadership, right? Because this fight is everyone's. So I think everyone has a role to play in this. And if they're not happy with the level of tactics being used, if they're not happy with the representation they're getting in their own neighborhood, we've got to do something about it. So before we end the episode, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time giving folks some ways that they can make an impact, so that when we're asking if we're headed for a general strike, they can help make it so, right? It's not a sit back and wait, see kind of moment. This is a take charge. And like I said, everyone has a different role to play, especially if you actually visualize this as warfare, right? This is class war, and not everyone is on the front line. That's never the reality. But we certainly don't send them there without supports. And ideally, right? So that means, attending the picket lines, if at all possible. CUPE, we will link CUPE and OFL sites to our show notes, because they are doing a great job of keeping all kinds of events up to date. And like we said before, they're right across the province. So folks can jump in, start their own, find one near them, whatever. But also, isn't this a great teaching moment for our children? Now, You've got them all day. I know what that's like. I am a mom, so I understand the impact this has. So I'm using it to take my little one, my biggest little one anyway, to the picket lines. He went with us to Queen's Park. I needed him to understand what collective power looks like. I mean, that might backfire on my house against me later, but I really want him to know what this is. And I let his teachers know as well. He will not be crossing any kind of picket, virtual or in person, and that this will be a teaching moment. Someone said they're learning online. Let your kids learn on the line. Okay? If you can't get to a line, have these conversations, make some signs. I tweeted a whole list, if you guys can get onto my Twitter, a whole list of things people can do to jump in. But it can be so simple as make signs with your kids, put them in your window. Make sure every single person out there knows what's going on and where you stand on it. Another good tip that I heard online yesterday, and you might discount like your little community groups as being able to play a part in this, but they're not. Whatever you do, whether that is a knitting group, a parent-teacher group, maybe that's more obvious, anything, a grassroots movement that's for housing, that is for healthcare, that is for whatever, get them at the very least to send out a message in solidarity, right? Get them together as a group, go to a picket, hold a solidarity event, fundraise for the strike fund. It's countless, right? But that pressure, that momentum, it's on us as well, right? It's just not something we have to wait to see if it fizzles out. We've got to keep that fire burning. So, Santiago, what are you going to be doing, friend? Like, we do this, right? That is part of the role too, right? A lot of folks out there get on social media and make some noise there.
Yeah, I'm still, to be honest, figuring that out to a certain extent. I know there are things that I want to do, and it's yet to be seen. I think I'm just feeling out, what the energy is, what people are doing, but also, this is essential, talking about what's going on, because there's a lot of noise, right? And being able to, throw out messages of solidarity, to be able to speak about what's going on, to be clear about the history here, to be clear about the implications here, to be honest about all of that that's going on, that is so important, because like we said, this is a much bigger issue, right? Not a lot of people are talking about privatization right now. Not a lot of people have caught that threat yet, right? A lot of it is focused on the very, very direct aspects of this, but not so much on the bigger implications. So talking about that is important. And I'm going to be at whatever strike, protest movements, occupations that there is going to be happening. That is 100% I'm there.
I feel like you're ready to light some tires on fire on the rail lines or something. You've got that glimmer in your eye. And between that and writing maybe some compelling articles for your fellow students.
Yeah, well, honestly, right now, I'm so beyond writing articles for Humber, because that's not going to cut it. So I'm weighing a lot of things right now, and that's why I don't fully know where I'm going with this yet. But I know that this moment is essential. That there's so much that can come from this, and one thing that we haven't mentioned too much right now is the history of victories that have come from labor, right? Because everything, all worker rights have come from victories from labor standing up and fighting for them, right? Your 5-day work week, your 8-hour work day, minimum wage, etc. The list is endless. I won't pretend to even be an expert on that, because I'm not, and there's too much, and there's so much to learn. But the clear part of it is that standing up and fighting for rights is how society moves forward. Waiting for those in power to do it has never worked. It has always taken people rising up and saying enough is enough. We deserve more. We're going to fight for that. that's how the world moves forward.
And I think that's why it makes this moment so exciting, because it potentially could be a lesson for so many people on that collective power, on the power of unions, on strike, on being disruptive. It's one of the reasons why I reject the use of the federal government to come in and solve this problem for us. That sets a whole new, very bad precedent. And what we need to do is show people exactly how rights have always been won, demonstrate it for them and let them see it in real life, not in a history book. And although it's a matter of securing rights and not expanding them at this point, that's where it leads. Once everyone understands, including neoliberals and capital, that we have harnessed that power, it will completely change the game, right? It will completely, we then can to start to expand rather than always being on the defensive. So I really hope Ontario keeps up the momentum and seizes this moment, and we do see a general strike. And I will do anything in my power to get it there. Although, our reach might be limited, that doesn't mean I'm not going to fight like hell as well. So I hope everyone kind of takes this on themselves in some degree.
And in the words of Fred Hahn, you don't know what you started, right? Like, and that's exactly what he means by that, is kicking open this hornet's nest. It's going to backfire on them. We're going to make sure that it backfires on them. It's not about asking for crumbs, right? No. We need so much more than that. And that's what it takes, right? And also, like, as is the intro to every episode, this is what democracy looks like, right?
100%. Thank you, Santiago.
Thank you, Jessa.
Like in all things that we do, there is a team behind Blueprints of Disruption. I want to give a big thank you to our producers, Santiago Helou Quintero and Jay Woodruff. Our show is also made possible by the support of our listeners. So if you appreciate our content and would like to become a patron, please visit us at www.patreon.com/BP of Disruption. So if you know of any work that should be amplified or want to provide feedback of our show, please reach out to us on Twitter at BP of Disruption.